Once you understand what Stalin did to Trotsky, you will never read an official history the same way again, not the killing. The killing was the smaller crime, and it came last. What should disturb you is the work done before it. A man lifted out of the photographs, out of the textbooks, out of the memory of a country that had once cheered him in the street. There is a mechanism underneath that. It is still running, and you live inside it. Begin with who he actually was, because the erasure only makes sense against the size of what was erased. Lev Davidovich Bronstein, who took the name Trotsky, was the second face of the Russian Revolution. He ran the Petrograd Soviet in 1917. He founded the Red Army and held it together through the Civil War from an armored train that moved between fronts. In 1922, when foreign newspapers printed the Bolshevik leadership, they printed two names, Lenin, Trotsky. If you had asked anyone in Europe that year who would inherit the revolution, almost no one would have said the Georgian handling the paperwork. That Georgian had been given a post nobody wanted, General Secretary, April 1922. It was considered clerical. It controlled appointments, personnel files, transfers, and who sat in which room when decisions were made. Stalin understood something Trotsky never took seriously, that in any institution, the person who controls the record controls the future, and the person who controls appointments controls the present. Trotsky was winning the arguments. Stalin was quietly deciding who would be in the room to hear them. But the offices are not the disturbing part. Watch the sequence, because it is a procedure, and it repeats wherever power consolidates. First, the man is made unnecessary. Trotsky was removed from the Politburo in 1926 and expelled from the party in November 1927. Then he is made distant. Internal exile to Alma-Ata in 1928, deportation from Soviet territory in 1929, citizenship stripped in 1932. 2. Then, and this is the step people miss, the man is converted into a category. He stops being a person with a biography and becomes an infection with a name. Trotskyism, an-ism, can be found in anyone. An-ism can be confessed to. By the time of the show trials, the official name of the 1936 proceeding was the case of the Trotskyite Zinovьevite Terrorist Center, and men who had known him personally stood in a Moscow courtroom and described a conspiracy directed by a man living 4,000 miles away, with no army, no party, and no money. Notice the strange requirement in that. He had to be deleted as a man and preserved as a demon. A regime built on permanent vigilance needs a permanent enemy, and the safest enemy is one who cannot appear in person to contradict you. So he was condemned to death in absentia, while simultaneously being scrubbed out of every photograph in which he had ever stood next to Lenin. Two operations at once. Remove the human being, keep the silhouette, and fill it with whatever the moment requires. The photographs are the part everyone eventually sees, and the part that never stops being unsettling. There is an image from Sverdlov Square, Moscow, the 5th of May, 1920. Lenin stands on a wooden podium, speaking to troops leaving for the Polish front. Beside the podium, on the steps, stand Trotsky and Kamenev. In the versions reproduced through the following decades, the steps are empty, not blurred, not cropped, emptied, with wood grain painted in where two men used to be. The historian David King spent much of his life collecting these before and after pairs, and the collection amounts to a catalogue of a state learning to retouch its own past with a fine brush. Group portraits thin out year by year, the same photograph published again and again, with fewer faces, until a table that once seated 8 seats, 3 men, and a great deal of tablecloth. Then came the books. In 1938, the party published the short course on the history of the Bolsheviks, printed in tens of millions of copies and made the compulsory backbone of political education. In it, the revolution has essentially one hero, and the man who built the Red Army appears mainly as a saboteur. A generation was raised on it. Libraries received corrected editions. Encyclopedia volumes were reissued with revised entries, and in later years subscribers were sometimes instructed to remove specific pages and paste replacements in their place. The past was not merely reinterpreted, it was physically edited, page by page, in people's own homes. And here the mechanism must be named precisely, because vague words about propaganda will let you off the hook. Hannah Arendt, writing in The Origins of Totalitarianism in 1951, argued that the goal of total power is not to force people to believe a lie. It is to destroy the shared ground on which any fact can stand at all. She described the regime's attempt to dig what she called holes of oblivion, places into which a person could vanish so completely that the very fact of his existence became unverifiable. And she made the observation that should keep you awake. The ideal subject of such a regime is not the fanatic who believes the propaganda, but the person for whom the difference between what is true and what is merely announced has quietly stopped mattering. The fanatic can be argued with. That second person cannot, because there is nothing left in him for an argument to reach. The Romans had already given the practice a name, damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory. Statues recut, inscriptions chiseled out, a name scraped from a monument so that eternity would have to look elsewhere. Orwell, watching the Moscow trials from a distance and understanding exactly what he was watching, gave the 20th century version its image, the memory hole, and a ministry whose actual product was a past that always agreed with the present. He was not inventing a dystopia, he was reporting a method. Now the heaviest item, the one that is not about Stalin at all. The erasure did not require the population to be deceived. Millions of people had seen Trotsky speak. They had his books on their shelves and his portrait in their offices. Erasure on that scale is impossible without participation, and participation is what it received. People took razors to their own private photograph albums and cut the faces out of pictures from their own weddings and their own regiments, not on command, in anticipation. They corrected their memories the way you correct a document before an inspection, and then, over years, the correction became the memory. That is the part no tyrant can accomplish alone, and the part he never has to. Nietzsche compressed this into 2 sentences long before there was a Soviet Union. Memory says, "I did this." Pride says, "I could not have." And memory, he wrote, yields. It gives way. What happened in Russia was that mechanism performed by an entire society at once, with the state supplying the pride and the fear supplying the urgency. The ice axe in Coyoacan in August 1940 was almost a formality. Ramon Mercader finished a man who had already been removed from history for a decade. If you want to understand where the real killing happened, it was not in Mexico. It was in the darkroom, in the print shop, in the schoolroom, and in the hands of ordinary people trimming their own past into something safer to own. So look at your own field of vision, because this operates far below the level of dictatorships. Someone leaves your company, and within a quarter, their name has fallen out of the origin story, and the projects they built are described in the passive voice, as though they had assembled themselves. A founder is bought out and disappears from the website's history page. A family has a person who is not mentioned, and children grow up sensing a shape in the conversation that no one will name. A relationship ends, and both people quietly rewrite who they were inside it, and both versions are sincere. Nobody involved thinks of themselves as falsifying anything. They are just letting the record settle into a form that costs less to carry. And you do it to yourself. You remember the decision as more considered than it was. You remember the exit as your own choice. You have deleted people from your own account of your life, not out of malice, but because the version with them in it implicates you. Here is what you will notice from now on, and it will not switch off. You will start reading histories by their absences. You will hear a name stop being said and feel the temperature change in the room. You will watch an institution describe its past and notice which people have become weather, events that simply occurred rather than people who chose. The gap has a shape. Once you can see the shape, you can usually say who used to stand there. Power does not end an opponent by defeating him. It ends him by arranging things so that no one thinks to ask who came before. The question is only whether you are still willing to ask it.